Judges Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the best online retailer for Magic the Gathering singles and sealed product, and gatheringmagic.com, your place to explore the game. Now it's time for Judges Corner.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another episode of Judges Corner. Today we're going to be talking about colorless mana and how it differs from generic costs. Colorless mana is mana devoid of color produced by cards. Cards like Boreal Druid or Ghost Quarter produce colorless mana when activated. There's also cards like Kozilek's Translator or Unknown Shores. As you can see, the symbols used to represent colorless mana between the two examples is different. Because in Oath of the Gatewatch, colorless mana was given its own unique symbol, just like the original 5. Older cards have since been updated to now tap for the new colorless mana symbol, even though nothing about them has really changed. Ancient Tomb has and always will tap for 2 colorless mana. The new symbol also made it possible to add colorless mana costs on the spells and abilities, while distinguishing the difference between colorless mana and generic costs. What is generic mana? Well, first off, there is no such thing as generic mana, but rather generic costs. Generic costs are any mana cost represented on a spell or an ability with a gray circle around the specified number. This could be the cost to cast the spell or pay for an ability. The mana you pay is the number of any kind of mana you have to spend to pay for the cost. It does not have to be just colorless mana, as the requirement is not specifically the new colorless mana symbol. For example, you have to spend 1 colorless mana, which is any mana that is not colored, and 3 mana of any color, including colorless, to cast Thought-Knot Seer. Some of you might be wondering, why the change? This might be a little confusing, and it's always been this way before, but it hasn't. In fact, for a long time, cards that added colorless mana to your mana pool specified it was colorless mana with the phrase, add a number of colorless mana to your mana pool. In Odyssey, Nantuko Elder was the first card ever produced using the well-known generic mana symbol to represent colorless mana produced by a card. We didn't see another card that produced colorless mana and used the generic mana symbol until Onslaught a year later. Right off the bat, you can see how confusing this might be for new players to see that colorless mana is represented by one symbol that shares 2 entirely different meanings. Now, colorless mana is colorless mana. Generic costs are generic costs, and each have their own distinct symbol. The only confusion I frequently encounter now with players is in regards to older cards that haven't received a recent printing with the new symbol. Just remember that if something produces mana and that mana doesn't have a color, then the mana is colorless. Now to answer specific questions. Can cards like Birds of Paradise or Mana Confluence produce colorless mana? No, because it states that it produces mana of any color, and colorless mana is not a color. But cards like Reflecting Pool can add colorless mana, because it says it can produce mana of any type that land you control could produce. But its sibling land, Exotic Orchard, cannot produce colorless mana, since it states mana of any color. Stuff like this can be confusing, but you'll find the answer to most of these questions just by reading the cards carefully. What about cost increases, reductions, or cost-setting effects, like Thalia, Eye of Ugin, or Trinisphere? Those all affect generic mana costs, and can be paid for with colorless mana or colored mana. Sorry, but no turn 2 Thought-Knot Seer off of Urborg and Eye. Finally, the last interaction I'd like to point out regarding colorless mana involves Worldbreaker and Eldrazi Temple. A few players might believe that with just an Eldrazi Temple and 1 other mana, you can bring back Worldbreaker by tapping the Eldrazi Temple for 2 mana spent only on Eldrazi spells or abilities to pay the cost of the creature in the graveyard. However, those who believe that would be mistaken. Thanks to Charlotte Sable with the Ask a Magic Judge Tumblr account, it was made clear why this interaction is a nombo. There's a corner case rules entry in the comprehensive rules that states, if a spell or ability uses a description of an object that includes a card type or subtype, but doesn't include the word card, spell, source, or scheme, it means a permanent of that card type or subtype on the battlefield. And while Worldbreaker might be an Eldrazi card with an Eldrazi ability, it's not an Eldrazi permanent in the graveyard. In the grave, it's just a card, and that temple cannot lend a helping hand, leaving you needing 1 extra mana to break worlds again. So that's it for our episode on colorless mana. Hopefully you learned quite a bit. If you have any questions about this episode or any other questions in general, you can always send us an email at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com or leave a comment below, and myself or someone else will be happy to get back to you. Until next time, make sure to shuffle thoroughly, play at a reasonable pace, and have fun.